In today's show, Damian Lillard is ultimately going to dictate where he lands this offseason. Well, Locked On Blazers, let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen, coming at you every single weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen every day. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're continuing our coverage, our round-the-clock coverage of the Damian Lillard trade saga. I promised you in yesterday's episode I would try to do some independent reporting, and I've come back from, working the text message lines with some independent reporting that I can bring you. That's what we'll talk about. It's going to be Damian Lillard's choice where he ends up. That's what the folks are saying out there. We'll talk about that in the first segment. Talk about the latest rumors, just sort of everything surrounding the Damian Lillard trade saga, some sort of other odds and ends, and then the blame game. I think we're reached a part of the offseason, which is the portion of the offseason where people want to point a finger. It's this person's fault. It's this person's fault. It's this and this. And I want to tell you that everyone deserves a little bit of blame. We'll talk blame game to close the show. But first, that independent reporting I promised you. Okay, if you listen to the show every day, which you should, it's a good podcast. Yesterday I said, I was going to round up all the rumors I possibly could about Dame, and I was going to do my best to do a little bit of, find out what I personally could find out. If you're a long-time listener to this program, if you're every day listener to this program, shout out to my everydayers, you know that I'm not this isn't like a breaking news spot. That's not the strength of this channel. It's not the strength of this show. It's what I do here really well, and I think what adds real value and why you keep coming back, and you do keep coming back, I appreciate you, is that I can synthesize the news and kind of read the tea leaves and make sense of the mess. That is my strength, and I know a little bit about basketball as well. So I don't come on the show and break news and tell you sources and like I don't fake the funk, right? Like a lot of the times I just don't know stuff and I tell you, here's my best guess. But I wanted to try to come into today's show with a little bit more because it's the biggest news story in the NBA, and I wanted to do my part. In a past life, I was a full-time NBA reporter, so there are people that I still know who work in the league to some extent, and so I wanted to do my best to kind of reach out to the folks that I know who work in this business and find out what I can about Damian Lillard. So here's what I got. Dame is going to dictate where he goes. I talked to two different sources who said as much. One who said basically that, let me be clear, again, I'm working the text message lines. One who wrote in a text message. This like that it's about when Dame gets traded to the Miami Heat, not if. It's when, and that is the assumption that most in the league, and according to this one person I spoke to, said is that is someone I trust, and I wouldn't share on here if I didn't trust them. That it seems like Dame to Miami is, if not inevitable, certainly the strong favorite at this moment, and that is the way that many are operating. And I spoke to another source who indicated that not only will the Blazers have very little say in where Dame ends up, that basically the Goodwin Sports Management, Dame's agent, Aaron Goodwin, is orchestrating the trade. Like he's working trade calls. That is not that surprising in the grand scheme of things. Like I don't mean to be like, oh my goodness, Aaron Goodwin is making trade calls. That's how the league works. Agents and powerful agents, and Aaron Goodwin's certainly one of them. That's who kind of makes it happen behind the scenes. Is the most powerful people in the league is the agent world. They are calling front offices and figuring stuff out. Like that is how it works sort of across the transaction spectrum at any time of the year. That is not uncommon, but the implication from the person that I spoke with, like the idea being that I did a show yesterday in which I included a trade package from the Utah Jazz, and the implication being, Michael, why are you talking about a trade package to the Utah Jazz? That ain't happening. That ain't happening. And I will say this, I did this, sending some text messages during the day to make it happen. You are listening to Tuesday, July 4th show. It's a holiday. So if you're listening to this on your holiday here in the United States, on your day off, thanks for starting your day with the program. But I sent some text messages, got this information, and then I listened to the Mark Stein and Chris Haynes podcast, and Mark Stein said the same thing. So I think what I was actually doing, and that podcast came out on Sunday, so I was 24 hours late, listened to it on Monday evening, 24 hours late. So what I think I was unknowingly doing was confirming information that was already out there. I'm not trying to say like I had it first. I didn't have it first. Straight up, this happened like I just didn't know about it. But I will say that I'm willing to wager that Mark Stein's sources and my sources are very different folks, albeit reliable all the same. So if I'm hearing that it's Dame to Miami seems like a certainty, and Mark Stein, someone who really knows stuff and who I super trust, says that everyone he has spoken to thinks that Dame to Miami is a certainty, it's going to be Dame's choice. It is. I mentioned yesterday's show, even before I had done any reporting whatsoever on this, and just sort of kind of walking through the logic of the trade world and what Dame wants, is like, it just seems like the Blazers will have to figure out a 3-team deal or 4-team, multi-team deal for someone to take on Tyler Hero's money and get some other stuff. And eventually Damian Lillard will play for the Miami Heat. It's about when. Part of the calculation might be that Jaime Jaquez has already signed a contract. He can't be traded for 30 days, so we're talking August. But whatever it is, it is trusted people in the media that you absolutely know, like Mark Stein and a podcaster in his basement like me, are hearing the same thing. Dame to Miami seems like a lock. And Aaron Goodwin is out there working the phones, trying to make it happen, I would assume, and this is an assumption, not reporting, is that what Aaron Goodwin is trying to do is, and that's Dame's agent, is trying to do is work the phones to find a third team with a palatable package that wants to take on Tyler Hero and will send on whatever that is, whether it's young players or additional draft capital to the Blazers to make it happen. And Portland will eventually agree to this deal with Miami and Team 3 and Team 4 to be determined. But the idea, I think, that was floated yesterday and floated by many listeners to this program, it's like, no, wait, listen to calls from New Orleans and Minnesota and San Antonio and Utah. It does not appear that is a very likely outcome. I won't say never. Certainly there's a world in which the Blazers get blown away by a trade package and the preferences of Dame and Dame's agency is just like, sorry, it's Zion Williamson and Herb Jones or something absurd like that. It's like sorry, we have to do this and you have to figure it out. Not too dissimilar. Donovan Mitchell was like basically a done deal traded to the Knicks, and then out of nowhere the Cavs kind of snuck in at the last minute and said, wait, we have a package that'll work. Donovan Mitchell is not the same. His relationship with the Utah Jazz is not the same as Dame's relationship with the Blazers. It's not really comparable. In that episode of This League Uncut with Stein and Haynes, they compared it to Kevin Garnett. I think that's about right. Like, I think that's the level. It's just a little bit different with Dame. And whether, like I said on yesterday's show, I don't know what O means. Like, I don't know what O means. I don't know what the Blazers owe Dame. I don't know what Dame owes the Blazers. I don't know what O means in this case. But I do know what the league is operating as, based on what I have heard and what others have heard, is that the Blazers that Dame is going to get his wish. It's going to be his choice. Let's talk about some other rumors and some sort of mitigating factors for Damian Lillard. And I have a thought on a comment Chris Haynes made about the league watching how the Blazers operate. That's what I want to talk about in the second segment. But before we do that, I want to tell you about PrizePicks. It's daily fantasy made easy. I play PrizePicks on the app. I played during the NBA season, and how it works is I pick between 2 and 6 players on every entry, and PrizePicks sets stat lines for things like blocks, assists, points, rebounds, steals, and I can go over or under the stat lines they set. If I go 6 for 6, I can win 25 times my money. But if I'm not feeling froggy, I can say, I'm going to say I get 4 out of 6. Slightly worse odds, but you still can get some money. 5 out of 6, you get a little bit better odds, a little bit juicy odds, and make some money. When you win, get safe and fast withdrawals. You don't have to play basketball. They got every other sport you're looking for on there. So if this summer you want to get in on WNBA action or Major League Baseball action, it'll be right there waiting for you. Or if you want to pick back up with me in the fall when the NBA season kicks off, well, you've got a long wait. But don't wait. Learn how to play PrizePicks right now. Go to PrizePicks.com or download the app, and first-time users can sign up and get a instant deposit match up to $100 when you use the promo code LOCKEDON. So you use that promo code, put in $100, they give you $100. Put in $50, they give you $50. That's a 100% instant deposit match. So don't forget when you sign up today to use that promo code LOCKEDON. All right. So it sounds like Damian Lillard to Miami is very likely from folks around the league. That is indeed how they're operating, is that is likely to happen. But there are still going to be other suitors out there. It doesn't mean that other teams won't work to see if they can find a deal. And I think James Harden's position in Philadelphia, where he's, opted into a single-year contract and basically asked for a trade and said, trade me to the Clippers. I think having another big fish out there on the market complicates things a little bit. And certainly, what if the Dame to Miami thing is like 88%, that 12% is massive, right? It is absolutely massive. And part of it is that there are a short list of suitors that you could find there's like a totally believable world in which Damian Lillard would be comfortable getting traded to, one of which is the Philadelphia 76ers. And I talked about in yesterday's show that the reporting from both Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports and Mark Stein of the Steinline indicated that the Sixers, who do not really have juicy draft picks to trade, they only have the 2030 unprotected pick, but they could send Tobias Harris's expiring money, and they could send a really good player under 24 in Tyrese Maxey. But according to Stein and according to Fisher, Tyrese Maxey is not available. And ESPN's Brian Windhorst said the same thing, that Tyrese Maxey is currently unavailable in trades, which makes the Philly package it was already relatively unlikely. But if you're not going to include your best piece, then it gets a little bit dicey. So Windhorst had been reporting on this over the course of the week since sort of this saga began last week and into the first couple nights of free agency. And he was on SportsCenter on Monday, and he said the following, quote, "I think of all the available pieces that you see out there on the board that could be offered for Damian Lillard. I think Maxey, Tyrese Maxey, is the prime piece. And again, if Philadelphia was making that offer, Dame Lillard might be in Philly right now, but they are not." This supports the reporting from Stein and the reporting from Jake Fisher, but I think it touches on something that is, I mentioned on yesterday's show that I think is worth reiterating. I said that I thought Tyrese Maxey was the best player that they could likely trade for. To me, he's just straight up better than Tyler Hero, and Hero is about to kick into a 4-year, $125 million contract. Maxey is not due till he's in the final year of his deal, won't get a new deal. I mean, he's extension eligible, I guess, until the first day of the regular season, but he doesn't have a new deal waiting for him next summer. He will play himself into that new deal very likely over the course of this year. He's going to get a whole bunch of money. He's really good. To me, he's a little bit better than Tyler Hero. They're similar players. Like, if you think Tyler Hero's way better because you're a Heat fan listening to my podcast, that's fine. I'm not mad at you. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. But like, to me, Tyrese Maxey is a little bit better. He's just a little bit better. He's been more consistent in the playoffs. Hero was really good in the bubble, has not been very good in the postseason since then. Maxey, again, very similar players. But Maxey doesn't have much value on the Blazers either. Like, Portland has this, right? A questionable defensive small guard under 6'4". They have Anthony Simons. They have Shaedon Sharpe. They have now Scoot Henderson. Scoot might end up being a good defensive player, but I'm willing to wager he'll be a bad one as a teenager, as a rookie teenager. That seems like a pretty safe bet. And if you were to launch a rebuild, another 4-guard quadrant under 6'5" with questionable defensive ability is not the place you want to start. But the reason that you'd be interested in Tyrese Maxey is because he's good. And the way that the Blazers are trying to reroute Tyler Hero to a third team, if you could just get Philly's package and reroute Tyrese Maxey to a third team, you might be able to get juicier stuff back. One, a little bit cheaper, so it's easier to like make the money work with a third team. And two, he might straight up be more valuable. It might be preferred. So I think Philly is off the board in part because they don't want to trade Tyrese Maxey. But if they were on the board, at least the reporting from Brian Windhorst suggests that the Blazers think like I do, and that they would say, yeah, we want him, or we want the ability to acquire Maxey so we can flip him somewhere else. I will say this, Philly voice, Kyle Newbuck, and this is reporting that is somewhat dated, but Kyle said when he wrote on Saturday evening. Kyle's a really good beat reporter for the Philly Voice, does a wonderful job. And Kyle wrote that basically the Sixers are operating as if Damian Lillard is his first choice to the Miami Heat will be honored, so they haven't really gone down the path too far. That was as of Saturday. I think that's what the whole league thinks, is that Dame's going to Miami. Which brings up a comment that Chris Haynes made on his podcast, This League Uncut, that he co-hosts with Mark Stein. Two veteran reporters, super plugged in dudes. And Haynes is obviously the Damian Lillard whisperer. They're good. They're legitimately good friends. Haynes was at his, was invited to Dame's wedding. Like, they're legitimately good friends. And Haynes has been covering Dame since his rookie year, yada, yada, yada. If you're familiar with the podcast, I'm sure you know who Chris Haynes is. But he mentioned on that show, and I think I saw this because it was like making rounds on social media, and it was like a big thing on r/Rip City. Shout out to my Redditors out there who are going through it. Hang in there, y'all. Hang in there. We're going to make it to the other side, I promise. And Scoot Henderson will be there. When we get to the other side, Scoot Henderson will be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. But I saw this on social media that Haynes said in that podcast, and then I went and listened to that podcast, which I realized then that Stein had already reported something that I thought was unique to this podcast. But what are you going to do? But Haynes said that, like, one of the reasons that, or sort of one of the factors that the Blazers have to consider when they are dealing Dame, and one of the reasons why they won't send him somewhere he doesn't want to go, and they specifically talked about the Utah situation, is that other players around the league are watching the way the Blazers operate, and that will have an impact. And I think that is true to some extent. It is a players' league. Like, as much as it, maybe nerds like me want it to be run by people with calculators. I don't want that, to be clear. But like, the pocket protector gang out there. Shout out to my Who Wants to Look at a Graph gang. But like, players still, particularly players of Damian Lillard's caliber, and someone who's, been in the league and been as good as he is for long, like, they have real sway, and it matters. But I do not think the idea that if the Blazers were to like trade Dame to Minnesota or whatever, just to like throw out up cold place, if they were to trade him to Utah or Minnesota or whatever, which again, I very specifically do not think, I think they're going to honor his request, that it would like, that players around the league would like take note of how the Blazers treated a franchise icon. They would. Absolutely they would. They would see that and they would say, dang, cold world. Like, it's a business. It happens all the time in the league. And there is some notion that this would be like, that Scoot Henderson would feel this and say like, oh man, do I want to like be here forever and plant my flag here if 11 years, 12 years later, they're going to trade me to a place I don't want to go after more than a decade? I just don't really buy that. I do think players notice, and they would take note of it, and it would be like a small little asterisk, like, oh yeah, like Joe Cronin did Dame dirty at the end of that. Like, absolutely, that would be a thing that players noticed for closing in on 6 weeks before they forgot about it, and before they moved on. Like, the real truth here is that the Blazers and something like 22 teams in the league are not players in free agency at a major level. Most teams in the league use free agency to add role players. Role players want a chance to make money and have an opportunity to play. If you are offering them that, they're not going to worry about the one time that you traded Dame to a place that's cold, as opposed to the place that he wanted to play in Southern Florida. I think what that means, my actual read on Haynes' statement, which I don't think is wholly false, I think it's just a little overstated. My actual read on it is that who would take note? Aaron Goodwin and Aaron Goodwin's ilk, Rich Paul and the Mark Bartelstein and the powerful agents in the league who say, like, if I have an option to not deal with them, I won't, because they don't honor what my clients want, and I'm mad about that. Like, I think, and very specifically, I think it would burn a bridge with Goodwin Sports Management, with GSM, not with anyone else. If the Blazers were, and they're not going to be clear, but if they were to trade Dame somewhere he doesn't want to go, like if someone swoops in with a Godfather offer and it's like, whoops, you play for the Hornets now, to name a very unlikely place. Okay, you're a Hawk. It would burn a bridge with like Goodwin Sports Management. It wouldn't be this like thing where players across the league say, don't go to Portland, they treat you poorly. Certainly players talk, and like that stuff matters. I think the Knicks, like, bad ownership has burned them for a long time. I think for, again, the Sterling era Clippers, I think that's like a real thing. And I think to some extent, maybe part of that explains why the Dallas Mavericks haven't signed a meaningful free agent in forever, seemingly my entire life, at least in the 21st century, haven't signed like a deeply impactful free agent every time they've lined themselves up to the latter half of the 21st century. I remember some point guards who returned there in the early aughts. But like it is, I just don't think. I think it is a little bit overstated that like trading Dame somewhere he doesn't want to go would be like a pock on Joe Cronin and the Blazers record. I think it would be a thing that would piss off powerful agents in the league and might get you earmarked as like difficult to deal with. Don't deal with him if you don't have to. But guess what? Everyone, like I said, if you're not dealing with top tier free agents, which the Blazers basically never will because of how the league works, role players need jobs, and they're going to take money. And like Bruce Brown is always going to take $20 million to go play for the Indiana Pacers. It's always going to work that way. If Blazers are offering that kind of money, it will always work that way. Okay, I want to talk about blame. On the same note, it's like, if the Blazers do this, it's like, who do we point the finger at? I think this situation is kind of messy, and it's very likely to drag on for weeks, which is fun if you host a daily podcast. At least we know what we're going to talk about often, at least once a week, as we get further into this mess. But like, soon we're going to talk about Summer League, I promise. But I think there's been this idea that you have to like pick a side who to blame. This is also like picking this up from social media, but I want to talk about my sort of thoughts on blame and how the Blazers ended up in this position. That's what we'll do to close the show. Join me in that third segment, won't you? Still a past first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked on Blazers. Portland is at a gross crossroads, quite frankly, where they are going to be forced to trade a franchise icon, someone whose brand has been being loyal to the city and the franchise and his people and the people in it. But he got to a point in his career where he said, I don't want to be here, and he has requested a trade. He is running from the grind, to use a phrase. And there are factions forming where people want to say, I blame the point guard. I blame the front office. I blame the other front office from the past. And I am here to tell you that everyone deserves blame. That's how this works. The way things are when anything goes wrong in your life. Many factors are at play, and no one deserves... I don't feel the need to like look at the scales and say, oh, that side is weighted a little heavier. I just look at the scales and say, yeah, there's a little bit of blame to go around. That's why there's a little bit of blame on every portion of the scale. So let's just start with the past. The Neil Olshey era Blazers refused to go all the way in. They kept mistaking good fortune for proof of concept. And instead of the moments when they should have said, this doesn't work, let's blow it up, let's trade CJ McCollum, let's take a big swing knowing it might fail, they did things like passing on trading for Kawhi Leonard, worried that with one season left on his contract, he might walk. Well, guess what? He did walk, but he won a championship in Toronto first. Taking the big swing would have worked, or at least might not have worked. Let me be clear. Taking a big swing very well might have been worth it. Not taking a big swing was continually playing it safe. And when then you did have success beyond what like the play it safe type rosters they put together, they tripled and quadrupled and quintupled and sextupled, and I don't know beyond that. Octuple, I don't know what 9 is. I could have got up to 8 pretty easily. I don't know what 9 is. Now the 9 tupled down. They just straight 9 tupled down on it. when they weren't very good when they got swept out of the playoffs in 2018, and then they came back in 2019 and had this sort of miraculous, if not a miraculous, very impressive run to the Western Conference Finals. They quintupled down on that team, and everybody got a contract extension and a raise. They didn't take chances, and they put themselves in a position where they had never cashed in their chips. And when they did cash in their chips, they did things like get Larry Nance Jr. and Robert Covington, players that help you stay in the middle. That deserves some blame. Damian Lillard deserves some blame too. He was deeply loyal to many players in the roster, and from what I understand, and I want to be clear here, pretty resistant to the idea of trading C.J. McCollum for almost all of his tenure with the Blazers. They would have had to talk him into it. That's the job of the front office, to be clear. But Dame certainly was like, nah, we can, like, this is the duo I want, blah, 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 blah. Like this, he never put that sort of like, hey, make the big move. In fact, from what I understand, at times was like, don't, but like, only do it under certain circumstances. Only do it for the Kawhi Leonards. Don't, no marginal, just slightly taller upgrades. Wanted to play with his buddy. Damian Lillard also deserves just some basketball blame. He has some limitations to his game. He's an all-time great offensive player, one of the great offensive players in the history of the sport. Truly, truly, truly a generational shooter, someone who has completely upended the geometry of the sport, the way he shoots from deep. Like, he is... the further we get away from his game, the more we will say like, oh yeah, he broke how... someone shooting from 35 feet consistently and accurately, shooting like slightly above league average from 35 feet away, broke the game. We will respect Dame's offensive arsenal more as we get further away from it. He's an all-time great, but he's also has pretty much never been an above average defender. Never been an above average defender. I don't need to caveat that with pretty much. He's always been a below average defender, and it's hard building a really good team around someone who is not at least a plus on both ends. It's hard to win at that level. Then you throw in the money. He was always making a bajillion dollars. He was always making the max money. He deserved that money. But this is the challenge. This is why the blame can go around. It's hard to win in this league. And if you are someone who is an absolute stud on one end of the court, like Dame's been, top 10 player in the NBA for, 6 consecutive seasons, something like that, a while, like a long time. He's truly an all-time great player. But he has challenges to his game that make team building, and particularly at a championship level, difficult. You throw that in with the inability to, or the unwillingness to take a big swing to upgrade the roster, a commitment to a paradigm of small guards that didn't work, you're going to get there. Dame deserves a little bit of blame in this. He also deserves some blame in how this has played out this summer. Every moment he got a chance to talk into a microphone, Damian Lillard took the opportunity to put public pressure on the Trailblazers. You can read that in a couple different ways. One, you can salute the honesty. Every time they asked him a question, he said, you better get me vets or I'm going to leave. If I leave, I'm going to want to play for the Brooklyn Nets or Miami Heat. He was being 100% honest. Dude wasn't lying. He was telling it like it is, and they didn't follow through. I'll do more on that in a moment. But putting the public pressure on the Blazers, and with the contract status that he has, put them in a difficult situation, because everybody in the league knew what the Blazers needed to do, and so the asking price to get stuff done went up. He put them in a tough spot by virtue of constantly putting public pressure on them. He was putting public pressure on them because he was probably worried they were going to do exactly what they ended up doing, which was nothing. So he was like, hey, don't do nothing. They still did it. But by putting public pressure on them, it put them in a worse spot. I think that is undeniable. Dame deserves some blame. And quite frankly, Joe Cronin deserves a ton of blame here too. He screwed this up. Or this was always his plan. I think there are 3 reads on Joe Cronin how the Blazers got here under his leadership. None of them are particularly flattering as we sit here today. The first read is that he always wanted to rebuild. But when he took over, there was marching orders to keep Damian Lillard in the fold from the ownership, but also get cheaper. So then he got into this dual dual roads of, okay, I'm going to tear down this roster, make sure I get no long-term money, make sure I get this trade exception that gets you Jeremy Grant because that's who Dame wants to play with, but no long-term money, and I'm not going to add like vets that are going to help into the future. Like I'm going to go younger. We're going to tank that first year. We're going to get a draft pick. We're going to put ourselves in this position. Then we're going to, in year 2, I'm not going to add a center to the roster. We're going to be intentionally bad again. We're going to tank again. And then we'll end up this way. The first read is that Joe Cronin always wanted to rebuild, but had to navigate the situation with ownership and with Dame such that he had to give Dame that fat contract because that was part of the marching orders. And that's how you got to why Dame didn't walk away when he did in 2020 or the following year in 2022. But Cronin always had this up his sleeve, always wanted to rebuild, and this was the way that you could rebuild and not look like the bad guy, and now Dame's asking out, and maybe he looks like the bad guy. That's read number 1. Read number 2 is that he was naive, and he really thought he could do both. Thought he could go young and convince Dame to stay. He really, really thought he could do both. Naivete does not sound like a positive read in my mind. And the third read is in conjunction with the first one, is that he just straight up lied. That he never intended to take a big swing this summer. And when he kept saying, I'm anxious to push our chips in, he never was that. He was anxious to push this rebuild in. So it's either the rebuild was always the plan and it kind of got jump-started by the Blazers struggling a little bit and ending up with the third pick, or it's that he straight up just lied about their path forward. I don't think he straight up lied. I think he overstated his plan a little too much in order to appease Dame. And I don't read him as naive. I read him as someone who got caught in the middle of two things. An ownership that wanted to keep their franchise icon and his preference to rebuild because he had been part of this for a while and knew that the roster needed a tear down, and the best way to tear it down is through the draft, and he knew those two things. But getting caught in the middle of this and the way he handled it does not look good. He deserves blame as well. And that's where we land up. The previous GM deserves blame. Damian Lillard deserves blame, and the current general manager deserves blame as well. You can choose if you'd like. You can say, I think I want to blame Joe Cronin. I want to blame Neil Olshey. I want to blame Damian Lillard. I'm not going to choose. I do not feel compelled to choose. I feel compelled to say, yeah, how you end up in this situation is a variety of things going haywire, going a little sideways. The team went sideways quite literally for a while. They were pretty much similar for a while. And I think the change in general management, the change in the front offices didn't end up giving you the big swing, the big risk that you'd always hoped. It maybe got you a guy who wanted to rebuild and did it in a strange way that ends with this ugly divorce in the summer of 2023. Everybody deserves some blame here. So if you have a friend who's who wants to say, whose fault is this? Answer it this way. Everybody. Everybody. It's everybody's fault. You don't get here without it being everybody's fault. That's going to do it for today's show. I promise we're going to talk about Summer League. Scoot Henderson is out here Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe are going to play a game on Friday night. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun. We're going to get there. You're listening to Tuesday's show. But we need to this is the biggest story in the league, and I feel compelled to cover it more than taking a break to say hey, Abu Baji is going to show out in Summer League. But I promise we'll get there. So if you're itching to talk actual basketball, penciled in later this week, a full show on Summer League. We'll talk Shaedon Sharpe. We'll talk Scoot Henderson. We'll talk positivity and what's next with the Blazers. But for now, I appreciate you rocking with the show and appreciate you rocking with me. Do me a favor, tell your friends about this podcast. Come back for tomorrow's show. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.